And this leads us to the first plenary session of today on the European and national policy context of sustainable energy investment. And I will give the floor to Mr. Peter Sweatman for the moderation of this session. Mr. Sweatman is Rapporteur at EEFIG, the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group.
Thank you very much, Julien. And Heidi, would you like to join us also on the stage? So, first of all, thank you everybody for coming at this time to join us here. I think that a lot has been said in the initial remarks in the plenary to give us an introduction to this session. I hope that what we can do with the time we have is ensure that this panel is as interactive as possible. A number of the speakers here you've heard from already. They will have another opportunity to give us some more detailed thoughts just coming up. But given that we are clearly interested in having you participate, please begin to think of your questions. There will be at least 15 minutes, and I'm hoping perhaps even slightly more, for you to ask questions of the panel. So it would be great if you could start to prepare those now, or as you hear our panelists talk, you can start writing them down. I think what I'll do is, Paul very kindly talked about sort of the role that I've played for EEFIG. What I wanted to do as a quick introduction from me is say that in 5 years, I've been focusing on energy efficiency financing and investment. And it's not just the 3% growth that happened to that asset class in 2017 that's impressive, at a time where renewable energy actually investments globally went down in the same year. But it's the fact that this issue is now full front and center in policymakers' minds and in financial institutions' minds. And I'll give you 2 reasons why I believe that is to be the case. Paul said that in the long-term strategy for greenhouse gas reductions, which Europe published just on the 28th of November, I noticed in their communication, of the 7 points that they wished to highlight, the first was to immobilize energy efficiency, and they mentioned near-zero energy buildings. So the Commission is adhering to its energy efficiency first principle. The first thing that it mentions in the long-term strategy is the need to halve energy use in Europe from 2005 levels to 2050 levels. I repeat what Paul said. I was involved in climate modeling over the summer as well. There is no carbon neutral 2050 pathway without dramatic increases in energy efficiency investments and finance. The long-term strategy goes on to identify the critical roles. So after it talks to its 7 points, it then has an entire page dedicated to investment and finance. The numbers of additional investments and finance that's required to enable Europe to be on its climate neutral pathway to 2050 is in the order of 175 to 290 billion euros. When we listened to the results of the high-level expert group who presented ahead of Europe's action plan for sustainable finance, what we heard from them was that of that gap, 75% of that gap would be in buildings. European buildings and energy efficiency are absolutely fundamental and core to Europe's long-term strategy and to private sector and household investments. In the description of where the investments need to be increased, the Commission strategy proposal talks to the need for private sector and household investment to increase. So as we think about today's discussions, we need to think about what mechanisms and tools going forwards, and I'm delighted to say that the European Commission has launched the 3rd phase of the EEFIG project. And the 3rd phase of the EEFIG project will focus, I believe, on these areas. It'll focus on how financial institutions can contribute more to enabling households to upgrade their dwellings, to enable businesses to save more energy. And I'm going to finish my introduction by noticing that yesterday, one of the core members of the EEFIG group, which is ING Bank, together with 3 other banks, which is Paribas, BBVA, and Standard Chartered Bank, all four of them in Katowice, announced they would align their entire loan books to the Paris Agreement. That's $2.3 trillion worth of loan book. And within the press announcement, the first thing that ING said is that they would begin by upgrading the 55% of their mortgages which go to D to G EPC labeled homes by 2022. So ING said concretely that it would upgrade half the low-performing energy performance homes in its portfolio over the next 4 years. So I think it's that kind of announcement which gives me the hope, and that kind of announcement which I would hope that the third phase of EEFIG would be able to build upon with other financial institutions. Because my firm and the experience I've had over the last recent years is that financial institutions actually do want to do this. And what we haven't seen is what we are seeing now, which is the actual delivery of the tools and delivery of the programmatic responses which are necessary to give us irrational investors. So homeowners, we are irrational investors, as Paul identified, because we require 46% returns on our energy efficiency investments. But we don't require them of our pension investments, for example. So we need financial instruments to bridge that gap. And that's what financial instruments and financial institutions can do. And that's why I'm particularly excited to be able to move into the third phase of the EEFIG, working with you all and working with those financial institutions to do that. So, having given you those introductory words, it's of course my pleasure to reintroduce in some cases and bring on in other cases our panel. I'm going to begin with Dr. Adensam, which is who I spoke to before. I'm allowed to refer to as Heidi. Thank you, Heidi, for joining us newly. Heidi is, in fact, the head of the Department of Energy Efficiency in Buildings within the Austrian Ministry. She has been working there since 2011 on these subjects. She is by background an economist, and prior to joining the ministry, she's published multiple times on looking at balancing environmental and economic impacts and their measurement and cost-benefit analysis in projects. For those of you who have already met Stefan Besser, Stefan is the head of unit for energy efficiency, and I quite interestingly note the rational use of energy. In the rational use of energy being a critical theme, I think, as we've noted going forwards, Stefan was extremely helpful to the EEFIG group in 2015 and 2016, where he, on behalf of the ministry, together with our partners at DENEF, launched what we called the EEFIG local process, where we took the EEFIG tools and we worked with 130 participants from Germany in identifying which priorities for energy efficiency finance were necessary in this geography, and those results were published on our website. Stefan has also mentioned the G20, which Germany hosted in Hamburg in 2017, and I have to say it was a fantastic opportunity because there is a task group called the Energy Efficiency Financial Task Group of the G20, which, again, I have the pleasure to be able to lead. And we, together with the support of Germany and the IEA, launched something called the G20 Energy Efficiency Investment Toolkit. And the G20 Toolkit actually took a lot of the work that EEFIG had already created for the European context, and together with the support of the members of that task group and together with the support of Germany, took those learnings and through engagement in China and in Asia and in Latin America, the support of France and Mexico, the co-chairs of that group, were able to publish a series of guidelines to G20 countries for the upscaling of energy efficiency investments and finance. So Germany did its part as G20 host, and that was referenced in the leaders' communique of that year. And then finally, coming back to Julien, what I didn't know about Julien is, in the G20 context, in his past, not only has he been focusing for 20 years at the Commission on aspects of industrial policy, trade negotiations, as director of EASME, but also he has run EU-Japan collaboration. And one of the things that, if you don't all fill our time with questions, I will ask Julien is Japan is going to be the G20 presidency coming up, and perhaps there's things in his past which he could elucidate us on how we can learn from the Asian environment, perhaps for energy efficiency investment and finance, but I won't start there. So I think what I'm going to do, if you'll permit me, gentlemen, is in the interests of the fact that we've heard from both of you, I'm going to ask, with your permission, if Heidi would be able to kick us off on this session. Would that be acceptable to you? Great. Heidi, please.
Hi. Thank you, Peter. And thank you also to the organizers to invite me to this conference and to give us the opportunity to change experience here with all the experts. Good morning to everyone. I will give you an insight in the Austrian energy efficiency situation and why financing energy efficiency measures is so important also for Austria. I try to use this. Yeah, great. Why is it important for Austria to finance energy efficiency? It's first what all the speakers said before. It's the Paris Agreement. This is one of the most important things why we need to improve our energy efficiency situation, and to improve the energy efficiency, to implement measures on energy efficiency, it is necessary to finance them. It is said before that 6 to 7 times more investments are needed if we really want to decarbonize our economy and our society. So the Paris Agreement is one of the first and most important issues why we have to deal with energy efficiency and financing energy efficiency. The second is the European Commission and the European Union. As Paul said, we have a lot of directives forcing us to go ahead with energy efficiency improvements, energy efficiency directive, buildings directive, eco-design, labeling and regulation, and a lot of other stuff that forces us. And in order to comply with all these things, we have to finance the measures needed there. And there is a national thing that is also important and that also forces energy efficiency and improves the situation with energy efficiency. This is the Austrian Energy and Climate Strategy for 2030. It is published this year, and it gives us a framework also on the national level, not only on the European level, to implement a lot of energy efficiency measures, and also a lighthouse for green finance. I will come to that later on a little bit more in detail. Yeah, these are the 3 most important things why we are dealing with energy efficiency and financing this. A few words on energy efficiency in Austria, not so much on the finance situation, but to give you an insight, and it's nothing new, it's similar in other member states, European member states. The target for 2030 we already fixed in Austria in our strategy. It is 25 to 30% improvement of primary energy efficiency in 2030 compared to 2015. So this is a figure, and let me tell you that it is on the one side not that ambitious as it looks like, minus 30% energy intensity, improvement of energy efficiency sounds quite ambitious, but compared to what on the European level, the target on the European level, 32.5% improvement of energy efficiency, we see that taking or assuming average GDP growth of 1.5%, our target, our 30%, would mean less than 32.5%. So it is a little bit less ambitious than the European Commission as a whole, or the European Union as a whole, tries to target. On the other hand, taking into account that Austria is among the top 5 energy efficiency performing countries in Europe, so that we are quite starting on a very efficient level in Austria, and taking into account that the 2020 targets couldn't be or will not be reached that easy as we thought, it is a quite ambitious target. So on the one hand, compared with the European level, it is slightly less ambitious, but on the other hand, when we compare with our past developments and with the potential we see, then we think it's an ambitious target, and we have a lot of challenges to reach it. So 2020 targets. In Austria, we had 1,050 petajoule target, absolute final energy consumption in 2020. And we see, and you see it in this graph, that it is unlikely that Austria will reach this target, because the black line is the final energy consumption, and you see it is stabilized since 2005. The red line is the target path till 2020, till this 1,050 petajoules. And we see, and what Paul said before, also on the whole European level, you can observe this development. Till 2050, also 16, we saw that we are quite good on track. But the latest 2 or 3 years, they show us a different pathway than we had on our target path. So this makes it more difficult than if we could reach these 2020 targets. And what is also interesting is that on the one hand, the absolute level, the absolute energy, final energy consumption level, we will not reach. But on the side of the energy savings obligation, we see that a lot of measures are in place, that a lot of measures have been realized, and we will reach quite easily the target of Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive, so the energy savings target is quite easily to be reached, but it is not reflected in the absolute levels of energy consumption. So there's a gap between what's really happening and ongoing on the measure side. A lot of measures are implemented, and on the impact of these energy efficiency measures that are implemented on the absolute level of energy consumption. And this gap has several reasons, such as rebound effects, or perhaps also assessment insecurities of what real energy savings are combined with the measures. But this is what we observe, and this makes it for the next period extremely difficult to guess the impact of measures we are trying to finance and we will take in place. Okay. So, what we are now doing to finance. So what you see is that a lot of things need to be done till 2030, and a lot of finance is needed. And at the moment in Austria, you have 3 main pillars of energy efficiency finance. That is, first and most important is private capital. So most energy efficiency measures are financed by private capital, by cash flows, or by households. And the second important thing is energy service contracts. Paul mentioned also before some Austrian examples for energy service contracts for the street lighting. I can add also for the public buildings, we have a big program for energy service contracts. It is, I think, 250 buildings are covered by these contracts. And I think the success story of this public building program is that they are already aggregating. So they put a lot of buildings together in pools, and one pool is managed by one project manager, and one pool is treated together, and therefore this since 1999 we are working with these programs, and they are quite successful because they deliver a lot of savings, and not only savings in terms of energy savings but also cost savings for the public sector. And I really want to thank also the DG Energy that they supported a change in the Eurostat guidelines that makes it possible to continue in Austria with this energy service contracts in the public sector, because the problem with energy service contracts in public sector is the government debt treatment. So contracts are most successful because municipalities and also the central government refurbishing buildings with contracts have a possibility to invest in energy efficiency without getting problems with their government debt quota. And therefore, it is really important and it is really good that this changed and that we can continue with this energy service contract. And we hope that it will remain with this new guideline of Eurostat. And the next thing, and very important, are subsidies. Subsidies are the most important federal, state, and also central government instrument to force energy efficiency investments in Austria. And here you have the big four, in Austria, the big four subsidy programs. For example, the first one is they are tailor-made to the different stakeholders and to the different investors. The first one is for residential buildings. It's around 7 billion in the period 2014 until 16, and these investments are for private households, building new homes and refurbishing their homes, and also for real estate companies investing in multifamily residential buildings. The second one is a central government fund. It is designed for companies to refurbish their buildings on the one hand, and also to invest in energy efficiency process improvements. This is a federal state, this is not a federal state program, it is a central government program. And then we also have the Climate and Energy Fund and an additional fund on the central government level to also add on finance residential building subsidies or to subsidize residential building refurbishments. This is the last one. And you see that the most important thing is the residential building subsidy scheme. It is more than 7 billion within 3 years, and the other programs are quite lower financed. And if you now think that these 3 pillars of financing in Austria, they are quite conservative, then you're right. At the moment, there exist more innovative financing instruments, green financing instruments, but they are not really widely used. And from my point of view, the reason why they are not used widely in Austria is that Austria has a AA+ rating. So liquidity is not really a problem in Austria. Money is there. The question is not missing financial potential. We have other barriers why energy efficiency is not that intensively implemented in Austria. And as you saw before on the map Paul showed us, Austria is one of the member states who is really less using the European funds. And this is also the reason because capital is not a problem. The problem is for companies, for industry, that on the one hand, the payback periods are too long. So 2 years is a minimum payback period. Industry is deciding for or against the project. And in Austria, as I said before, a lot of low-hanging fruits are already harvested. So now the really expensive and the more transaction cost-intensive projects are lying and try to find its way, and it's much more costly. So money is there, but it's not, the economic performance is not at the moment in a sense where industry would invest. It is similar with households. On the household side, in addition to the economic issue, you also have the high transaction cost and also difficult life circumstances, let's say. If parents are living in their house and they are 60, 70 years old and they know that their house will be sold when they have to leave their house, they are not investing in measures that have a payback time longer than 10 years. So we have different stakeholders, different lifetime circumstances, and we need to deal with all these. And I think, as also mentioned before, and I don't tell you anything new, but aggregation of projects, especially for small economies like Austria, is very important. We have a lot of small projects, and some of the European funds are not really usable for Austrian projects because they are so small. And on the other hand, the transaction costs are quite high for smaller projects because using, for example, European funds needs a lot of paperwork, needs a lot of administrative burden, and therefore a at least what our experts hear in interviews with municipalities, for example, who could benefit from European funds, they tell us that at the moment it's not really necessary to use these funds because administrative burden is so high that it's not really worse, or that they are not, other financial instruments are easier for them to reach. Yeah, and for the municipalities, or not for the municipalities, but for the central government, another tricky issue is that a lot of buildings are historical buildings. So there is a lot of energy savings potential in these buildings, but the potential is costly to capture. And all these barriers together, and the long-term perspective of the Paris Agreement and the long-term strategy of the European Union launched last week, make it important that we also in Austria, even if we don't see the problem at the moment with financing energy efficiency, but this long-term perspective and the long-term target, the decarbonization target, makes it so important for us to consider new ways of financing, because to invest 6 or 7 times more than so far will need more capital and will need more financial instruments. And fortunately, we have in our energy strategy, energy and climate strategy a lighthouse project that is dealing with these new financial innovative financing instruments, and that is a green finance lighthouse in this strategy. So within this lighthouse, there are several projects or several measures introduced that we already started with the implementation, and that will be implemented within the next 1 or 2 years. And it is in a first step, we want to analyze the market, the Austrian market, to see what instruments have really a chance to can be in a broader sense used by all the stakeholders. Then second is we try to involve all the stakeholders in a stakeholder dialogue, to first involve them in somehow, to enable them to afterwards then use these instruments, and to find out what instruments are really needed and what instruments can then be implemented in a smooth way. And a pilot project called Austrian Green Bonds should be launched, and it should finance renewable energy and energy efficiency, and it tries to bridge the gaps between the local and the national and the regional level, because we see that there are different projects with different requirements for energy efficiency financing measures. So this pilot project tries to find out how a new instrument for Austria can be designed to bridge these gaps. And then we already saw that there are a lot of barriers in laws, for example, the Pension Fund Act, that have to be removed in order to let new financial instruments become more successful and become more to get used more by the stakeholders. And last but not least, the Energy Transition Investment Plan is one of these important measures amongst this lighthouse project. In the Transition Investment Plan, we will figure out what investments are necessary till 2030 in order to get on the pathway of decarbonized economy till 2050. And this is why we want to give security to investors. We want to inform all the stakeholders that investing in energy efficiency is needed and has future impacts, and will have an impact in future. Yeah, this is the Lighthouse project on finance, and now in a few with a few points, I would like to present you a project financed by the Horizon 2020 in the framework. It's a CEFIPA, it's on sustainable energy, it's a sustainable energy financing platform. It's a project with two Austrian partners, the Austrian Society for Environment and Technology and the Energy Changers. It's a consultant agency. And what they try to do is to develop for Austria innovative solutions, financing solutions, not only to finance energy efficiency, but to finance the energy transition. So energy efficiency, renewable energy, and to give a structure and to give a pathway how to implement also these innovative financing tools. They have three main working program. They have three main steps what they are implementing, and this is a finance lab. They take some stakeholders important in this field, and these stakeholders should develop a financing structure, financing projects, and should define what are the most important legal barriers that need to be removed. Then the structured identification of potential projects is one of the work packages that are important in this project, and the implementation of the platform itself. So at the end, we hope that we can implement a platform where financing instruments, innovative financing instruments, before developed together with the stakeholders, are presented. Okay, I'll finish. This is my last slide, and it only gives an overview on what, especially for energy efficiency, is done. And we have 6 real estate funds that so far are financed, and it is about 170 millions who are invested, and 7 billions of the overall investment volume. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Just from the organisers, what time would you like us to end the session so I can coordinate? Having offered 15 minutes of questions, I'm not sure we're going to be able to deliver on that. Andy, Florian, any guidelines to timings? Just keep going? Okay, well, forget coffee then, guys. So I'd like to offer the floor to, well, the correct order would have been Julien. Julien, would you like to go now? Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we have been talking already quite a lot about building renovation. And it's very natural because building renovation represents about 75% of the 178 million euro that we need to invest every year on top of current investment levels if we want to reach our Paris Agreement objectives. That means that the rate of buildings renovated each year should actually treble from 1% of the building stock to be renovated each year, which is what's happening today, to 3%. So that's a huge effort that we need to put in. And one thing that strikes me is how easily we forget what this, renovating your home, means in real life. We've heard from Heidi about, let's say, older generations who do not invest in renovating their homes. But has anyone in the room renovated their home recently? Well, quite a few people. And Paul was mentioning his own experience a bit earlier today. And for those of us, like Paul, like you, like me, who have done these big renovation projects in the past few years, we know that it takes most of our free time for a period that can last from 3 months to more than a year. We spend our evenings, our weekends on it. We spend all our savings. Sometimes we have to take loans. We have to restrain ourselves and not go on holidays for a while. So adding the extra hassle of a complex energy renovation on top of the normal renovation project is often too much. And in most cases, people do the bare minimum. They replace the boiler, they replace the windows if they are old, But we know that this is not enough if we want to reach a decarbonized and highly efficient building stock by 2050, as we have pledged to do in our long-term strategy. What we need to do is to renovate buildings to low energy levels, and that means at least insulating the facades. So it's not surprising that we are not yet on track to reach our European objectives, and we need to look at energy efficient investments like a market where there is a demand for investments that is not sufficient, and where there is a supply of finance that also needs to be supported. So what we need to do is put in place and develop a new set of policies to support energy efficiency by acting on those two levels, the demand and the supply. Paul told us this morning about the energy efficient policy framework that has been put in place by the European Commission. But what Paul and Commission colleagues cannot do is to issue yet another directive, and a directive that would impose to banks to lend more on energy efficiency. Today, what we want to do with you is actually to discuss those challenges that we cannot overcome only through law. We need to engage the market actors throughout the value chain of energy and efficiency investments. That means, of course, engaging banks and investors, but also the building owners, the local authorities, the construction sector, transport operators, utilities, energy services companies, and so on and so forth. And what we do in my agency, in EASME, is to provide funding from the European Horizon 2020 program to projects that work with market actors in order to support the implementation of European policies. My key message, if you want, is that based on the experience that we have in managing those projects, we can engage market actors into the energy efficient transition if we have the right implementing tools. The tools, as I said, to support demand for energy efficiency investments, the tools to help the financial sector invest in energy efficiency, and the tools to organize the dialogue like we are doing today. So let me start with a few examples of projects that we fund to support the demand side. For that, let me go back to our example of renovating our own homes. In most cases, when we renovate our homes, we have very little knowledge of energy efficiency issues. And even when we do, we just don't have the time to work on them because we have many other priorities in life, in our project, at work, and that's we call the burden of renovation. So the first obstacle to investments in energy efficiency is to make it easier to bear that burden of renovation. On residential buildings, what we do is to support a number of projects that develop a comprehensive setup of services to support homeowners throughout the renovation journey. Let me take one example in one of the 3 member states we are focusing on today. In France, we have given funding to the Alsace region, it's perhaps 200 kilometers from here, to create a new public service called Octave. Octave coordinates all services available to homeowners who want to retrofit their home with a focus on low energy renovation. From the beginning of the renovation to the end of the project, Octave holds your hand at every step. Instead of turning to the energy info point that we have in many European regions, and then to an energy expert, then to an architect, then to 13 different craftsmen on average, and then preparing again an average of 5 different applications for different public grants to support your energy efficiency renovation, everything is streamlined by Octave. You have a single interlocutor, the construction companies are trained to work together, low energy renovation measures are standardized, and the application process with partner banks is simplified. So instead of being a nightmare, energy renovation in Alsace becomes simple and accessible to everyone. And that makes a difference through this integrated solution including support not only for the finance side, but also for the technical side. Octave has already delivered on 200 renovations, and the objective is to reach 1,500 renovations per year in Alsace. They will be speaking later today, so you will have the opportunity to hear more directly from them. So that's an example on residential buildings. Now let me turn to public buildings and street lighting. We also have projects under Horizon 2020 in this field to support public authorities across Europe in setting up energy performance contracts, as we heard from Heidi. Here the concept is the same. We provide technical assistance to make inventories, energy audits, to procure an energy service company that will design and implement the renovation, and sometimes even get paid based on the savings that they generate. In many cases, the energy service company finances the upfront investment when the public authority cannot pay for it. An example in Turin, in Italy, is the 2020 Together project that led to investment of 12.5 million euro in the renovation of public offices and schools. Another gap that we are trying to fill through our projects for local authorities is the gap between the Sustainable Energy Action Plan of a territory. In Germany, you would call that the Energie concept, and the actual launch of investments. What we see is that local authorities very often lack time and skills to prepare an investment program, in particular when it involves energy service companies or homeowners financing part of the investment. They miss the resources to define their roadmap to investments, how to finance each type of investment, what this implies, how to organize the process. So what we have done is publish a call for proposals under Horizon 2020 on city facility for a total of 16 million euro, where we aim to select a consortium that will be in charge of giving small grants of something like 50,000 euro, which can be used for external advice or for internal staff of local authorities. Applications will be simplified in order to reach as many local authorities as possible throughout all 28, 27 member states. The call is closing in February, so local authorities, you still have time to apply for grants in early next year. So that's how we support the demand side. Now on the supply side, what we try to do is to encourage the financial sector to invest in energy efficiency, because they don't lend for an energy efficiency investment because the revenues that it will generate are important. They lend because the borrower has a good balance sheet, a good revenue, and not too much debt. And if you look at the energy services market, many companies have actually a small balance sheet and already a lot of debt. So investors don't trust the cash flows of the project, and these companies can only borrow with the highest interest rates, or worse, they cannot borrow, and no finance happens in many countries. One of our projects is called Investor Confident Project. It's a quality assurance approach that ensures that an energy efficient project is developed with the best quality standards in order to reduce the technical risks of not reaching the savings. Investor Confidence Project has protocols that can be used by building renovations in all member states, and they are developing protocols for street lighting and industry as well. The interesting thing here is that they have gathered a network of investors with over €1 billion to invest in energy efficiency projects that follow their protocols. Another great initiative that we have is the Energy Efficient Mortgages Initiative. It will be presented in the breakout session on buildings. In a nutshell, what we do is that we are supporting a market initiative which starts from the observation that an energy efficient home has a better value on the market and is less exposed to high energy prices. So that means that energy efficiency impacts on two fundamentals on the mortgage. Not only does it increase the value of the collateral, but also it increases or it reduces the risk of default, which could lead to higher loan amounts and lower interest rates. The question really is, how do we quantify this? And well, to have the answer to that question, we'll keep the suspense. You will need to go to the breakout session where the Energy Efficient Mortgage Initiative will be presented and where they will give you the answer. I would just mention that as of last June, they launched a pilot phase with 37 banks and national associations, which altogether represent 45% of the European mortgage market. So it's really a major achievement already. And finally, the third aspect on which we are trying to act is to organize the dialogue between all the actors. And that's what we are doing today. Events like this are an excellent example of how we can link the demand side, building owners, energy efficiency experts, and the supply side, the financial industry. It's a part of, as I was saying in the opening, 30 such events through Europe. We also organize a number of roundtables with stakeholders where we go into the details of what can be done to support the demand and supply side. We organize webinars that are available on the Sustainable Energy Investment Forum website. And most countries where we have organized an event have actually been coming back to us and asking to continue working with them, which is a good sign that those events are really helping things on the ground. We also fund projects at national and local level because this is where things are happening. And we heard this morning from Heidi about CEFIPA in Austria, the Sustainable Energy Finance Platform for Austria, which is actually organizing their final event tomorrow in Vienna, which concludes 3 years of very intense discussions with all Austrian stakeholders on finance for energy efficiency and renewables. So to sum up, my message for this morning is that EU-funded projects can play a key role, they do play a key role in mobilizing stakeholders for the implementation of the EU energy and climate objectives. They support the demand for energy efficiency investments, they help the financial sector invest in energy efficiency on the supply side, and they organize a real dialogue between all stakeholders. The projects that we're funding are deeply embedded in the national and local contexts, which we know are very different from one country to another. The solutions are not the same for Germany, for France, for Austria, and of course for more diverse member states across the Union, and that's perfectly fine as long as we all go in the right direction. And the strength of Europe is that we can take the best from each country, learn from each other, and I believe that we are contributing to doing this to facilitate a modern energy transition, an energy transition in which energy efficiency investments paves the way for a more prosperous, a safer, and a healthier European Union for all European citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julien. In terms of timings, I've been informed that Stefan will have his 15 minutes, which was the fair allocation for his speech, and then at 10:02 we will have 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll have coffee at 11 for those people who are keeping time. Thank you. Stefan.
Just here from my place, and I try to be a bit, or try to be brief in order to save us some time for the debate. I can do so as many of the things that has been said by Heidi and Julien, I don't have to repeat it. The challenges and barriers we face in the market for energy efficiency investment has been perfectly described by Julien. We fully share these analysis. Yes, we need to simplify business models. We need to reduce transaction costs. We need to raise the awareness and the availability of resources for investing and developing projects in this market. And I don't have to repeat. It's the analysis is really fits very well for the situation in Germany. And I also share the view expressed by Heidi. The bottleneck is not on the supply side of money or capital. We need to increase the number of attractive projects, and then investors will spend money, will put their money into these projects. At least for Germany, this is true as well. We don't have a problem with the supply of capital in this market. The second reason why I can be brief, the BMW E is co-hosting this conference, and so when we prepared the agenda, we put some thoughts into what kind of examples can we present for Germany, and so we are in Frankfurt. This is the hometown of the KfW. And of course the colleagues will present their promotional schemes for the building sectors. A colleague of mine later on will put some insights into the state of art of the contracting market and things we are doing there. And I already mentioned this project called ACE, Asset Class Assessment. That is something similar or comparable to the investor confidence project for the building sector, and this will be presented later on in this workshop. So I really will focus on a few figures and few thoughts on the state of art in Germany. Talking about the situation of energy efficiency finance in Germany, my first question was, what is that? What is energy efficiency finance or investment? So far, we don't have the full picture for all sectors for these kind of investments, because often the motivation or the reason for an investment is not just saving energy, of course, but many factors pay into the decision to replace technology, renovate a building, and so on. So we have to find indicators and definitions what we consider as being an energy efficient investment. A good insight is available for Germany for the building sector. Let me give you one figure. In year 2016, 42.5 billion euros have been spent for the renovation of houses in the residential buildings. This is an impressive figure, I guess. But compared to our targets, it's by far not enough. In Germany, we have a rate of renovation of in the residential building sector of 1% per year, but we would need, or we need a rate of 2% or even more in order to get in line with our targets to reduce the energy need in the building sector. So. The market is a big one. A lot of billions are getting spent there, but we need to increase that. We need to more than double the investments which we see right now in for example, in the building sectors. 2 years ago, we for the first time published a new document called Energy Efficiency in Figures, and we are working with our experts from the department which is dealing with energy statistics, and we hope that in 1 or 2 years we are able to present figures for the market volume in all sectors, including also transport and industry, to show the importance and magnitude of the market for energy efficiency in Germany. And we are open and happy to share this kind of work with our colleagues from Austria, from France, but also with the European Commission. So if you are interested, we can present the work we are doing on this, because it's important to raise the awareness of what is the energy efficiency market and what is the jobs and the market volume related with the issue. Another figure that illustrates the importance and the current state of art of energy efficiency in Germany is the promotional schemes. Heidi mentioned that for Austria, we also have a large set of different schemes in place. In total, we spend more than 3 billion annually for these programs. And for example, for the building sector, we know that €1 of public money spent for the scheme mobilizes up to €16 private investments. So promotional schemes can be a very effective way to mobilize investments from the from the private sector. And last but not least, a third area I'd like to talk about, that is the contracting market. This the kind of business model making use of the potential for attractive energy efficient investments that already exist. That is called contracting. In Germany, the market volume in 2016 was nearly €8 billion, and in fact I don't know what are comparable figures for Austria or for France. So we know that the potential for this market is much higher, and one of the things where we have to do our work on is increasing the use of contracting for making use of energy efficiency potentials. I think it is very helpful to have today the exchange on the different kind of projects where we try to develop and improve the environment for energy efficiency improvements. But one of the findings I kept in mind from the EFIG process was also that the recommendation to the policy side is that incentives and clear frameworks are needed to drive investments. And this is exactly what we are preparing for the next year. The new agreement, a coalition agreement between the three parties, which form the current government in Germany, includes the mandate to develop and adopt a so-called national energy efficiency strategy in the next year. At the same time, next year, a new law for the implementation of our climate targets will be adopted. And so we think about new measures and instruments, and I will just mention a few as I think for the policy side, for the ministry, these are the main drivers which must be in place in order to speed up the investments for energy efficiency. One of the measures we are discussing, and I have to be honest, we are discussing it since many years, but this time we have to succeed in really starting the new program, is a kind of a refund program based on taxation for the renovation of buildings. This would be complementary to the existing conventional promotional schemes, and we really believe this opens up a new chance to address people, because saving taxes is always a very attractive thing for German taxpayers. And if we should be able to agree on this new instrument next year, we believe that can really give a push for the market of the renovation market for buildings. We are currently putting together two laws in Germany. One is regulating the energy standards for new buildings, and one is regulating the standards for the use of renewable energy in new buildings. And now we are merging these two, and we believe this will lead to a simplification and more predictable regulation in this field. Also very important to give clarity for investors, and we hope that this will help driving more investments as well. Last point I'd like to mention, there's no official position of our ministry on this issue, but a big debate on carbon pricing in Germany as well. Our minister last week said we will debate proposals which lie on the table, but we are not fixed in our position whether we will turn into the direction or whether we will not do so. But many experts in Germany recommend the way to increase prices for petrol and also for fuels used for heating in moderate but predictable steps. Of course, we are aware of what is happening in France right now. It might not increase the appetite of German policy to use this instrument, but we saw that within the last years, when price levels for fuels has been very low, this drives the investment rate also down. And on a personal basis, I don't believe that we will be able to implement our policy and to our targets against the market. So we need investment incentives for investments also on the level of the energy costs. So I think policy has to set a clear framework and use the right the instruments and measures. Of course, it's very helpful that on Monday the new energy efficiency directive for the next decade until 2030 has been adopted by the Council. We also have very clear and mandatory targets for the non-ETS sectors. That is also a very clear pathway we have to follow, and combined with very strict sanctions. So the framework and the targets are clear. Now we have to deliver on the instruments, and it can be and it will be very helpful if the projects that has been started and just presented also by Julien helps to make investments easier and to lower the transaction costs. And I'm very glad that today we have the chance to see what is the current state of play in these kind of projects. Yeah, I'm looking forward for the exchange. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. So we're just about to enter the question time. We have about 10 minutes. And just while you think, Stefan, the only thing I didn't hear you mention was energy efficiency networks, which I thought was a fantastic development in Germany, which was copied also in Mexico and other countries that I know of. Can you comment quickly as to whether the energy efficiency networks are working and how that policy measure is improving?
Yes, a very good project. We have been in charge for that in the initial phase, and I can say that I saw on one slide, I think presented by Paul, 140. That was the state of art in the last year. Now we have 210, I guess. So made progress. Whether we will succeed in creating 500 networks at the target of these. Of this common activity with the German economy, I don't know, but still we see more networks are getting set up, and it's difficult to convince company to join these kind of networks, but the experience is whenever the companies do so, the experience is very positive, and we believe that this is a very effective tool for making use of the energy potentials, in particular in industry. I wouldn't consider this as an instrument in particular for I mean, in the very end, it's companies which join the networks are doing some kind of measures, and that means investments as well. But we see this as a possibility to increase the use of energy management systems, and it's a smart way to introduce this into companies, because these networks lead to lower cost, and this exchange of experience leads to more ideas, more knowledge, because people come together and share what they are doing, what works, what was not so successful, and this is very helpful, obviously. It is a tool to drive investments, of course, but the idea is to activize the companies and the people who are working on the energy management systems in the companies. So yes, it's part of our national policy. It's a good instrument, but it's not addressing particularly the issue of finance.
Thank you. Okay, so hands up, people with questions. If you have a question, please announce who you are and what your organization is called, and then either address a question directly to a member of the panel or to the panel as a whole. So if you'd like to raise your hand, sorry, yes, yes, please, gentleman in the back.
Wenn es geht auf Deutsch, Herr Besser.
My name is Harald Rapp from EEFIG. I'm one of the managers and I'm responsible for the city development. So I'm also a practitioner on site. We set the rules in the technical field also. I can only agree with you. In Germany we have got quite far. And we also have very good projects. When you see it in connection with the EU, also my praise, particularly regarding city development, DG Regio, when you summarize this. So it's a very essential. I am able to accompany programs in Saxony and Thuringia regarding the infrastructure, and we have very small needs for funding. What we have at our availability is sufficient, and we have to see to it. And this is the question now: how do we mediate this on site? How do we get this to the municipalities, and how do we get it to the investors? We cannot only see energy efficiency. I think in Hamburg they are preparing this already by really seeing to the added value, what is very important for the municipalities and for the citizens. But the individual buildings, these funds are not being called upon. And what I see in the various regions, which I just mentioned, I see there we have to see that at the very local side, that with social measures, I mean, we have seen it in France. I was able to have the chair of the measures in Eastern Europe. We have to see on site that we get ahead in the cumulation efforts, and here we have to start. And we have to not only see to the efficiency in our cooperation, but also other measures. And this is now my question: is this also envisaged at EU level to get together with a building ministry, with the Regio, to get a harmony there? For instance, we have the standard procedure for the and we have already created means against the financing gap. And there's an enormous effort of administrative measures. And this is sometimes also an obstacle, and this should be brought down. So that is the last hint. And one tries to open, do you try to standardize on the EU side instead of going more and more into detail? Thank you.
Thank you. I think if I can summarize, that question is perhaps to you, Julien, because my understanding is the speakers worked in city-level projects and with municipalities, and the question was directed to the high administrative burdens potentially in preparing projects, getting funds out, and there was a specific question to the EU, which is, with respect to Regio, has Regio been coordinating, and would those funds be made available for buildings specifically? Julien.
Yes, thank you. And you're totally right. What we have to do is really to facilitate at local level the take-up of all the instruments that exist, because the instruments are there. So there are projects like Octave I was mentioning in Alsace that are good examples of what we can do at local level. We are organizing beyond these sustainable energy investment forums, round tables that are much more practical with local and national authorities, precisely to try to develop concrete measures on how to put that in place. For the next multi-annual financial framework, as we call it in Brussels jargon, which is our long-term budget for the next 7 years, 2021, 2027, we are planning further investments in this field, both at research and technological development level under Horizon Europe, which will be the successor of Horizon 2020 and which will see its budget increase. We will have also the LIFE program for climate action and environment that will include, for the first time, an energy component, and in particular energy efficiency and that kind of actions. And we are working with DG Regio to try to see how we can better link the programs with each other. It is true that in the regional funds, one of the things we have to deal with is that it is for the regions, for the beneficiaries themselves, to decide what to do with the funds and how to develop their national action plan and where to put the money. So we have to establish a better link there.
Thank you. Any further questions from the floor? Please raise your hand. There is a roving microphone on both sides. So yes, a lady here in the middle.
Hello, my name is Priska Sonntag. I'm from the NCP Energy in Germany. And I have a question to Mr. Guerrier, who just said that the multi-annual frame program is discussed at the moment. And my question is, what is the reason why energy efficiency is taken out of Horizon Europe and put into LIFE or in different other programs? Because I thought combining the stakeholders and addressing the stakeholders in Horizon 2020 was actually a simplification and a positive effect. Thank you.
Well, it is in a sense correcting an anomaly, because Horizon 2020, the current program, is for research and innovation. And if we look at the climate action part or the environmental part, you have research and innovation projects under Horizon 2020, and you have the, let's say, prototyping, testing, close to the market projects, which are under the LIFE program. For energy efficiency, somehow for historical reasons, everything, including close-to-market activities, including those sustainable energy investment forums, are under Horizon 2020. It has some advantages, indeed, as you say, is that under the same program, we are covering the whole, let's say, range of actions from technological research to close-to-market actions. But we saw in the case of climate action and environment that as long as there is a good coordination between LIFE and Horizon, we can actually mobilize more funding, and we can have this good coordination for the whole range of actions for environment and climate action. The fact is that it is my agency that is managing both that part of Horizon 2020 and the LIFE program. So there is a smooth cooperation between both, and I'm convinced that it will work the same way in the future for the energy efficiency part. And when you see that there is a proposed increase of 60% in the funding for LIFE, and there is also a very significant increase in the funding for Horizon, the future is bright as long as member states in the Council and Parliament do agree with the Commission proposals.
Thank you, Julien. Well, I've just been told by our organisers on the front row that coffee is ready. That leaves me to do two quick things before you have your coffees. The first and most important is to thank all of our panelists. I think we've had a fantastic insight into both the German and the Austrian perspectives and details of their programs, as well as from Julien and EASME from the European Commission's perspective. And the final thing, in my introductory words, I noted that 4 banks were going to go and renovate their portfolios to understand how they can help their clients upgrade their homes. Having spoken to those banks as members of EEFIG, I know that in France and Germany, one of the things that's preventing them from deploying these programs is the fact that the energy performance certificates databases are not public. And it's very hard for financial institutions to get easy connections between the properties and the properties they have in their portfolios and the energy performance labels. And I think I would sort of say, we haven't discussed it, but as a specific plea from the financial institutions side, when we talk about data and when we talk about enabling millions of consumers to engage with the energy performance of their home, alongside the European policy, which is the harmonization of these labels, and in order to improve their quality, I think it would be quite helpful to banks to have access to that information in some way. So I don't know, I don't want to leave a question hanging if there was a response from anybody, but also perhaps to develop further in our sessions today. So, no response, I will leave it there, and I wish you all a very successful conference. Thank you.